What a lovely, lovely, quiet day it is. Isn't it nice when you go outside now or drive around, it's so quiet because everyone's home during coronavirus? That is so cool. I love it. I am Caleb Jones, and this is the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast, freedom-focused lifestyle design for men, the only place where we show you how to improve both your woman life and your business/financial life, because you need both as a man in order to be happy. I want to tell you a little story about my grandpa, my grandfather, who passed away several years ago in his mid-90s. So when my grandfather was 17 years old in the 1940s, he was sent off to fight in World War II. And he served actually in the Navy. He actually fought in the Battle of Midway. He watched men he was close to get killed. He watched men explode. He fought in the war. I believe he was wounded. I'm not 100% sure on that. With these war veterans, sometimes they don't like to talk about the gruesome stuff, so you have to guess between the lines sometimes. And he survived, and he came back. He had already married. I believe he had married before he went off to war. So he was off to war for a few years, came back in his early 20s, had 2 children, one of which was my dad. And then my grandfather, in the late 40s, early 50s, was working at a gas station. The way he tells the story is that he was making, whatever minimum wage was back then, a few cents an hour, literally. And he wiped a guy's windshield. This is back in the 1950s, where when you pulled up to a gas station, 5 guys came out and wiped down your tires, wiped down your wheels, wiped down your windshield, basically kissed your ass. This is back when the Western world was on the rise and doing well, and capitalism was alive and well, instead of today, where we've embraced corporatism and socialism. But I digress. So it was a good time back then. And anyway, when he was done filling up the gas tank for this guy handed him $1 as a tip. He tipped the gas station guy $1. Now, $1 back in the late 40s, early 50s was about $11 in today's dollars. So this guy, this young kid, gets a tip for $11, and he was poor. So $11 for a tip? I mean, it's like a week or two of pay back then. It was crazy. So he's like, holy shit, I can make $11, the equivalent now, inflation equivalent, just getting a tip from a guy? Man, I should start my own business. And so he started his own small insurance company from scratch with no computer, no internet, no LinkedIn, no Upwork, no cell phones, no outsourcing, no FedEx, no UPS. So if you want to send a letter to someone back in those days, you had to wait a fucking week to get a document signed. No DocuSign, no fax machine. And he busted his ass throughout the 50s and 60s. And eventually he built up the business where he became a low-end millionaire. By the time I was born, I believe in the early 70s, my grandfather, I believe, was worth $1 million, maybe a little more, in, 1960s, 1970s dollars. So feel free to do the inflation equivalents then. A lot of that money bled out to his 2 sons, my parents, or at least my dad, I should say, my dad and my uncle. But basically, by the time I was a kid and my memories were able to be engaged, by the time I was 3, 4 years old and my memories began, he was already retired, and he lived a great life for my entire life until he died just a few years ago. And so I never knew him with a job. I never knew him working. He was just retired, and he was amazingly confident, amazingly strong, amazingly masculine, amazingly outcome independent, because when you're retired and no one can tell you what to do, it's pretty nice. His wife, my grandmother, who I never met, she died when I was a baby. She died of MS. So he married his secretary, and that secretary became my grandmother, Grandma Nona. She passed away, maybe 20 years ago, and he was single the last 20 years of his life. So what he did then is that he lived part of the year in Anchorage, Alaska, and part of the year in Phoenix, Arizona, and he had 2 girlfriends. He had 1 girlfriend in Phoenix and 1 girlfriend in Anchorage. They were both in their early 50s. He was in his 80s at the time, and he had a great life. He was a great, great, strong, powerful guy, and I really looked up to him as a masculine role model. Now, was he perfect? No. He was the traditional World War II generation, so he was very alpha male 1.0. He had a lot of drama with people. He had a very difficult relationship with my dad. My dad had a very difficult relationship with his father, my grandfather, the guy I'm talking about. He would blow up and yell at people. He would get really mad. He was very arrogant. He was loud. He was crass. He was racist. All the usual stuff you'd expect of very, very old people. But barring those flaws, which were standard for that generation, he was an amazing guy. And what's interesting is that he was typical for that generation, what they call the greatest generation, the World War II generation. That was the norm for men back then because men back then were born out of times of adversity. They were born from the Great Depression. They were born from World War I and World War II. That's the world they came out of. That was their generation. And so these were strong, powerful, kick-ass, masculine men. They weren't perfect men, but they were strong, masculine, tough. And you may have read the studies about how there has been a massive decline in testosterone in the average man as compared to today from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. As a matter of fact, this is even worse than I thought. I just read a report yesterday that said that since the 80s, which was when I grew up as a teenager, that was my era, the 80s. Since the 80s, the average levels of testosterone for men since the 80s has gone down 19%. Since the 80s. So in my lifetime, the average testosterone level of the average adult male of any age is now almost 20% lower than what it was. Why is that, do you think? Now, there are a lot of reasons. We could get into a big discussion about why testosterone rates have decreased. But the biggest reason is we no longer live in times of adversity. We live very pampered lives. The typical guy wakes up and sits in his car and drives to work and then sits in an office, right? And then goes home and sits on the couch. And he doesn't have to worry about world wars. He doesn't have to worry about depressions where he loses his fucking house. He doesn't have to worry about he doesn't have to worry about competing tribes coming in and trying to kill him. He doesn't worry about people trying to rape his wife. He doesn't have to worry about crime, really, not really. He doesn't have to fight in gladiatorial combat, right? He doesn't have to deal with the things that most men had to deal with for pretty much 99% of all of human history. Now, that's good. I'm glad that we live in wonderful lives. I love technology. My background is IT, and I'm very happy that we're going to have more technological revolutions as we go forward. I'm very pleased with this. I love technology, and I fully intend on integrating technology into my own body as the decades go on and as we start merging ourselves with the machine world, nanotechnology and all that good stuff. I am more than happy to do that. I mean, I do a miniature version of that now with TRT. I'm on testosterone replacement therapy. I want to make sure that my testosterone for the rest of my life maintains at the levels of an 18-year-old man, which, by the way, they were. My last testosterone test, my total testosterone is 1,140, which is equivalent to an 18-year-old, a healthy 18-year-old boy. Great. It's good stuff. So I'm happy with that. However, there is a price that we have paid as men. There is a price we've paid for this new pampered pussy lifestyle, and that is that we have all become betas. And I have roughly estimated, and I think I'm right, it's not scientific, but I think I'm right about this, that around 70% of modern day men are beta males. They're pussies. And beta is a range. You have complete total loser pussies on one end and decently confident, okay guys on the higher end of beta, but they're still betas. When they go home, their wife, their girlfriend, boss them around, tell them what to do, their boss at work, etc. They're still betas. And so you have men, you have soy boys, you've got guys with low T, you've got the millennial generation and Gen Z, both of which are much more pussified than even my generation, Gen X, which by no means was a tough, rough and tumble generation at all. We had our moments, but not really. And so men today are very different. They're radically different from men of yesteryear. And that is because we, and specifically you, do not experience adversity. One of the most interesting things about this coronavirus crisis that I have observed is how men, most men, or at least a strong plurality of men on the internet, are reacting to this. And I've already mentioned this on my blogs, how a lot of men are choosing to freak out about this and be terrified about this and be worried about all these horrible predictions about what might happen and what about hospitals and people might die and some people have permanent lung damage and blah, 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 blah. The economy is going to be in a depression for 4 years and 30% unemployment and oh no, oh my God, and how they just swim in this negativity. Other men have chosen to instead focus on the fear, focus instead on boredom. And a lot of guys are just saying, well, I guess I'm just going to be, they don't say this, but you could kind of tell from their words, they've more or less made the decision to just be bored for the next several weeks or months while they sit at home and watch TV and do nothing. I have not experienced the emotion of boredom in perhaps 35 years. I don't even know what that would feel like. The last time I was bored, I was a little kid. I was probably 12, maybe not even that, probably 11. I don't even know what that would feel like. If you gave me an extra 20 hours a week in my work week, or not in my work week, just in my life, You gave me another 20 hours of free time in my week, they would immediately be filled with fun stuff and work both. They would immediately be filled. If you gave me an extra 100 hours a week, which I know is physically impossible, but if you somehow did that, they would immediately be filled with stuff. I don't even know how someone could be bored, but that's the world I live in because I'm motivated. Now, one of the reasons I'm motivated is because, as some of you probably already know, I grew up in a family that was very financially strapped. Now, when I was a teenager, things were okay. But when I was a kid, we were not quite poor. I think that's overstating it, but we were very financially limited. Let's put it that way. And it really bothered me and created a lot of angst in me when I was a kid that my family didn't have enough money to live a normal life. And I hated it. I couldn't stand it. And that was my adversity. That's what I had to overcome. Later in life, I found myself decently overweight. So I had to lose a bunch of weight. Still have more to go, but I had to lose a bunch of weight. That was my level of adversity. I was a virgin until my early 20s because I was filled with all kinds of religious societal programming from my religious mother about how evil and terrible and awful sex was and how scary it was. So I had to overcome that. That was my adversity. When I was 35, as many of you know, I went through a divorce and I had to start all over again at age 35 as a divorced beta male dad trying to figure out how to date. And I had to learn how to be a guru level dating guy. And I did that within 2 years, which was a decent amount of work. And that was my adversity. I have been through several recessions, one of which destroyed 60% of my income overnight. Another which caused serious problems where I almost went bankrupt. And that was my adversity. I had to overcome these things. And so adversity is good. Adversity makes you a man. Now, how does that work with the Alpha Male 2.0 model of long-term consistent happiness? Because that's an interesting question. My entire model is long-term consistent happiness. And I always add there as consistent as is possible in the real world. Can you be 100% consistently happy for the rest of your life, for the next 50 years straight, and never have any unhappiness? No, that's not possible. Can't do that. But as consistently happy as you can, as consistently happy as you're able to, based on real world parameters. And throughout your life, you're going to have some adversity, and this is good. Matter of fact, there are some guys who I like who talk about forced adversity, where they actually recommend you make life harder on yourself, like you become a minimalist, or you don't sleep on a bed, you just sleep on the carpet, or you fast for long periods, just don't eat for a day or 2 or 3. Or, as I've recommended on my YouTube videos, you get involved in MMA, full contact karate, or whatever it is, where you're actually getting into real combat with other men. You need to face that adversity. By the way, it's something else I went through when I was a kid. We didn't call it MMA back then in the 80s and early 90s, but we called it full contact karate, where I would step into a little ring and I would fight a guy, usually a guy bigger than me, a head taller than me, usually, or stronger than me or whatever. It was full contact. You could kind of do whatever you want. As long as you didn't kick. I think the only rules back then were you couldn't pull someone's hair and you couldn't kick him in the balls, although we wore cups. We wore regulation supporters, as they called them later. But anyway, other than that, you could beat the shit out of the guy. And I did. I got very bad. I got battered, bruised, bloody. Several times I walked off the mat and I would leave red footprints on the mat from the blood that was leaking out of my body. And this is when I was a kid. This is when I was, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, and that was my adversity. I went through that and that made me a better man. And I worry if you have lived a life where you've had very little real adversity, I worry that you'll be a less effective guy in terms of building your Alpha 2.0 life. Now, let me define adversity. Because some guys say, well, yeah, I've had problems in my life and, my dad left. Well, that's bad. But that's not what I call adversity. Or, my mom is a bitch. She yells at me. Or, I haven't had sex in a year. That's adversity. That's not what I'm talking about when I say adversity. I mean a serious, serious problem. You have no income for several months and you got to recover from that, right? And during this coronavirus, a lot of guys are running into that problem. You're physically threatened or physically harmed. Your dad beat you up or something like that. Or you've been in a scenario where you had to get into a fight and you had to fight for your life, something like that. You had to go to war, something like that. I remember a long time ago, one of my mentors from afar, Sylvester Stallone, was talking about in an interview. He said, the biggest problem with men is we don't have lions anymore. And the interviewer was like, what? Yeah, we don't have lions. We used to throw you to lions. We used to, get on the gladiatorial combat, hand you a sword. You didn't really get a lot of armor and we threw lions at you. And, he says, I think we should bring back some of the lions. I think we should bring back some of the spears, the swords, because that's what men are missing. They no longer live lives where they have to face real adversity, not video game adversity, not bullying on the internet. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about real adversity, the way that men of old, men in history had to face. Now, again, I am glad that you never have to face something like the bubonic plague. At least, hopefully, we don't have to face something like that. I am glad that you don't have to fight in the gladiatorial arenas. I'm glad you don't have to do that. I'm happy. I am not one of these guys who thinks that we should rewind the clock and go back to the 1950s or go back to the 1800s or, one of these Bronze Age guys. Bronze Age living. I think that's pretty cool, but I don't think you need to go that far. I'm happy for the advancements we have today, but I think you need to go through adversity, and I think you need to view adversity as something that can make you a better man instead of something that should paralyze you or make you afraid or make you retreat. I think that's really important. So this coronavirus really will separate the men from the boys, at least as much as is possible in the modern era. I think that's a good thing. Matter of fact, it's helped me realize those members of my audience who were really beta males all along, and those members of my audience who have the desire, at least the desire, to become Alpha 2.0 or who are already Alpha 2.0 or even Alpha Male 1.0. They're my brothers too, Alpha Male 1.0. I would far rather you be an Alpha Male 1.0 than a beta. I mean, it's no contest. And I've been able to identify through this crisis, both in my audience and through people I know personally, what category men really are in. Because a lot of guys apparently have talked the talk, but really haven't walked the walk. They've acted like alpha males or want to be alpha males, but then when this coronavirus hits, they lose their fucking minds. And they freak out about all these scary numbers and scary statistics and scary news stories and scary predictions. And they focus on that, which is the opposite of what you should do as an Alpha Male 2.0. As an Alpha Male 2.0, you not only need to take action to get through this crisis, but to thrive and to prosper and to benefit from and to invest your time during all this downtime in this crisis. So what you do during this crisis will speak to the man you really are. You can look at adversity and make it terrify you and paralyze you or make you bored in some cases. Or you can say, this sucks and it's a good thing. It's a good thing I'm having these problems because going through this adversity will make me a better man. This will help me improve so that the next time I go through adversity, and this is important, the damage will be less. The reason that I have gone through, at least so far as this recording, I have done very well in this recession/crisis in terms of sexually and financially. I haven't had a single major problem at all, at least not yet. And the primary reason for that is all the groundwork I have laid in the last several years because of the last time this happened back in 2008. I suffered in 2008. I said, well, fuck this. I am not going through this shit again. I'm going to make sure that the next time we have a crisis/recession, I'm going to be good to go. And I spent all the years from 2008 to 2020 building an Alpha Male 2.0 infrastructure, both sexually and in my finances and in my business life, both, so that now when we are here once again, guess what? I am good to go. Matter of fact, I've had a good time, more or less, during this crisis. Whereas if I was the typical guy, typical beta male, typical low T guy, typical guy who hadn't experienced any real adversity yet, I would be freaking the fuck out right now. I'd be one of those betas on the internet screaming, go, oh my God, 30% unemployment. Oh my God, what do I do? And I have no money. Oh fuck, I can't get laid because there's lockdowns. And oh shit. So the way you want to view this is your Alpha Male 2.0 life is long-term consistently happy because of the groundwork you're laying now and the groundwork you've laid in the past, both sexually with women and financially in your business and in your investments and in your financial life. So you have a graph, let's say, of long-term happiness. And every once in a while, maybe once every 10 years or less, you have real adversity. You have adversity that comes along and it causes maybe a dip in your happiness. But every subsequent event of adversity, the dip gets smaller. So with every recession you go through, it affects you less. With every time a woman dumps you and you don't have sex anymore, that event affects you less. So, 20 years ago, if a woman dumped me, because it happened, when I was a traditional monogamous beta male, when a woman dumped me, it was like catastrophic. I felt terrible. I didn't know what to do. I was hurt. I was paralyzed. I would worry about where I was going to go get laid next because I didn't know how to bring new women into my life. I was monogamous. I only dated one woman at a time because I was stupid. And it was really horrible. Today, if a woman leaves me, as you already know, the listen fitty process, I don't even notice. I have so many women on rotation, I don't even care. And then there have been many cases literally where I didn't even notice. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen Susie in 6 weeks. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even notice when it happened. So I had adversity, but every time I had it, the curve dipped down less far. It was a more shallow curve. And today, going into my 50s, I'm about to turn 48, going into my 50s, When I have adversity, I still have them, but when I have them, it's not a real big deal anymore. And the reason for that is I had adversity in the past. So you need to view adversity as something that is required for growth as a man, not something that you need to fear, and more importantly, not something that needs to blindside you all the time. The biggest, craziest thing about human beings with these recessions, and I've mentioned this before in other contexts, is that we have a major recession once every 10 years. And so if you have experienced several recessions already, like I have, this new recession shouldn't be a surprise to you. You should have already been prepared for this. And if you weren't, what the fuck have you been doing? Now, I get it if you're a young guy and this is your first recession, you've never experienced this before, and your dad or your mentor has never taught you how to prepare for this kind of thing, that's one thing. But if you're a guy in your 30s or 40s or 50s, and this recession just smacks you in the head because you weren't prepared for it, what the fuck have you been doing? Hello? It's amazing to me how people don't prepare. I have written articles, several years ago about all the things I do to prepare my home. So I always have 30 days of long-term non-perishable food in my house. I always have at least 10 days of water. I have about 2 weeks of water as I record this. And that's not just drinking water. That's for drinking and bathing. I also have ways to cook and prepare food if I don't have electricity. I also have a huge emergency savings account in real cash and in gold, both as a combination. So no matter what happens, even if there was no electricity, no food, no running water, and no income for weeks, I'd be fine. And I would be one of the rare people in the world who would be fine. You would think after all these recessions and chaos that people would learn, but they don't. You've got to make this a learning experience and a preparatory experience for the next time you experience adversity. So mentally, view adversity as a good thing, as a method for growth, and logistically, use this time to prepare for the next time. So the next time we have a sharp recession, the next time we have a pandemic, because we're going to have another one of those too, you will be fine. It'll be no problem for you. You'll be like me during this coronavirus thing, where everyone's freaking out and you're sitting back with a smile on your face, getting laid, getting paid, cashing checks and snapping necks, as they used to say in the early 2000s. Cool? Cool. I will talk to you again very soon. I hope this has helped. Stay strong, stay in there, use this time wisely. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.